Okay, number three, here we go. Um, Sorry for my answer being so long, but the things you're saying need to be explained somehow. So this is why it takes me some time to answer you. Um, where do we stop? The Exodus. Um, like I told you, there we don't find any scriptural evidence for the Exodus in Egypt. So we might say, what about inscriptions, monumental inscriptions, as they're really typical for Egypt? The problem with that is that in the ancient Near East, monumental inscriptions, like we find them in Egypt and also in Mesopotamia, are only done when a king or a pharaoh made a war against one of his neighbors, and especially when they won. That's also a thing about Bible history. In ancient Near Eastern history, everybody wins always. So if the king of Egypt, the pharaoh, has a fight against the Hittites in Kadesh in the 12th century before BC, and that actually happened. Um, they had a fight, they had a war, and both recorded that they won, but none of them won. Or not just not one, none of them, but one of them won and one lost. So why did they both write they won? Because in ancient Eastern history, it's not typical to write when you lose. But we find it in biblical history that the Bible writers write about their losses, that they write about when they did something wrong. This is so much not typically of ancient Near Eastern thought. So, this is why we don't find any inscriptions about Hebrew slaves in Israel. So when we want to have a proof of the Exodus, like a solid proof, I would go with you, there is none. But there are hints for the Exodus. I've already mentioned the Semitic slaves in Egypt. There's another thing. In the countryside of Palestine, Israel Finkelstein, he's an archaeologist from Israel, and he's one of the really loud he makes a really loud criticism on the Exodus narratives. So he's not an evangelical Christian. But he found villages in the time of the 15th and 14th century, starting in the hillside of ancient Palestine. So he also came to the conclusion that this has to be a new culture from outside, which wasn't inside Israel before. Back in that time, it wasn't Israel, but inside the land of Canaan before. The special thing about them is they were building totally different houses, like the architecture was totally different than the houses normally used in the land of Canaan. And all over Canaan, people ate pig. The special thing about these new culture starting off in the hillside of Canaan is they didn't eat pig. So Finkelstein found the rests of the animals they ate, and there was no pig to be found. He didn't find any pig. So he came to the conclusion that these people refused to eat pig, which is really typical of Israel. So this is why a lot of scholars say that this sticks to Israel being in the hillside of Palestine in the 14th century BC. And this totally fits to the conquest narratives in Joshua. We don't have any reason to doubt that Israel conquered Palestine in the 14th century. If we wait for archaeological evidence, what shall we wait for? Even if we found a grave from the 2nd century BC saying, here is Abraham lying, what would it prove? It would prove that there was the Abraham. But would it be the Abraham of the Bible? Couldn't it be like some Abraham? Archaeology itself doesn't prove nothing, doesn't prove anything. You need written documents to record history. So there is written documents from that time. And they are all, it's possible to harmonize them all with the Exodus account and the conquest narrative in the Bible. And the Bible itself claims to be a document talking about this as a historical document. So why should we refuse it? There is no reason to refuse it. So if we want to say that the Bible is not reliable as a historical document, how do we write history at all? If we say this, there is no history before 3000 because nobody wrote anything. If we claim the Bible to be not historical at all, we have to make the same claim on every historical document ever written, that it is only possible that what is written inside that document, that it is only possible that this is true, what is written inside a document, if it is proven by archaeology and other documents. So if we have this high level of criticism to every written document about history, we wouldn't know anything about history before 1800. So for me, this seems to be a really unlogical and inconsequent view of history, to say that it's not possible that the Exodus account didn't happen. I think it's the Exodus accounts and the conquest accounts in Joshua, they have a good fitting in the history of the land of Canaan and in the history of the land of Egypt. They fit really good into that time, so why should we refuse them to be from that time and record something that had happened? So, what is my next point? My next point is your point. It's the dating of the Gospels and the dating of the New Testament books. And here I'll stop and go for hopefully the last part, which is going to be the fourth part.